Welcome, everybody, and thanks for joining us. I'm honored to have with us today Commissioner Vilaseca, Secretary of Commerce and Community Development, Lawrence Miller, and Janet Doyle, who's the Program Manager at IBM. And I'm going to have each of them speak in that order a little bit about the initiative that we're launching today. But the Commissioner of Education and myself feel very strongly that it's imperative that in order to prepare Vermont's kids, Vermont's children, Vermont students for the workforce of the 21st century, it's critical that they have college math skills that make them eligible for higher education. We all know that you can't get into a four-year college of quality in this country if you don't have algebra and geometry. Currently, you will find that across Vermont, which required that about 47% of our schools that students take Algebra 1. It's required in 31% of our schools that students take geometry. It's required in 13% of our schools that students take Algebra 2. The result is that while Vermont students do very well in the English language arts areas of concentration, with almost 70% of them meeting the standards that are set around the country, only 36% of Vermont students are proficient in the math scores across the country as compared to our peers across the country. So listen, when I go out and talk to job creators, they say to me, Governor, we have jobs, but we can't find enough students who have qualifications in math, who can do the math that is required of today's workforce. What we are presenting today is a proposal to the State Board of Education that Vermont schools require Algebra 1 for all 9th graders, mandatory geometry for 10th graders, and Algebra 2 by 2017 for the class of 2017 moving forward. We also are going to review requirements in chemistry and physics in the near future to ensure that we're keeping up there. Bottom line, Vermont has a bright jobs future. Our kids have a bright jobs future. But whether you are running a piece of manufacturing equipment or repairing an automobile or getting a job in computer technology or a job at an entry job at IBM, you have to have these qualifications. I think that these basic standards are critical to ensuring that our kids, Vermont kids, have a great jobs future in this state and can work and make a living in the greatest state in the country. So we're strongly recommending these. When I talk to people, as Janet Doyle will tell you, from IBM to smaller companies, they say, Governor, your kids cannot do math proficiently to work in our workforce, so we have to train them ourselves. That is not acceptable. So I want to turn it over to the Commissioner. Thanks so much for joining us, and then we'll hear from Lawrence Miller and Janet Doyle.
Thanks, Chris. Good morning. One of the things that this should not be a surprise to the school folks, because our current NECAP standards that have been around for almost a decade require that all students be prepared to have algebra and geometry by the time they graduate from high school. That has not occurred, obviously, by the numbers that the governor proposed. So based on the College and Career Ready standards, which President Obama and Secretary of Education Duncan want all students to be prepared for, we really have to make sure that all of our students are taking courses that are not cutting off opportunities for their future in high school. So when we have over 50% of our kids who are not taking algebra or geometry, that means they're not prepared to apply to four-year schools, two-year schools, or trade schools and certificate programs. Anywhere from a welding program to an auto mechanics program to a technician to an engineer all require advanced math and science requirements. It will be a challenge, I think, for schools, because right now this doesn't just impact high school. It impacts what happens in the 8th grade, 7th grade, 6th grade, 5th grade, 4th, all the way down. So the challenge for schools is now that we have to have higher expectations for all students. We know that we have about 44% of our students who are going on to post-secondary education. So what we've created to a certain extent is a two-tiered system. We have many students who are doing well. If you look at our AP scores, where many of our students go to college, we are preparing many students very well. At the same time, we have over 50% of our students who are not being provided those same opportunities as the other students. So what this is doing is going to require now that all students be held to higher standards that will require them to achieve at a higher level of math and science that will prepare them for the future. It's a terrible thing when you have a 14-year-old making a decision that impacts their future. So if they've at least gone through algebra, geometry, and then eventually algebra 2, it doesn't matter where they want to go. They will be prepared to achieve at a level that will be commensurate with their education. And ultimately, when I met with the folks at IBM last week, and they're describing some of the challenges that they have finding technician positions, which are typically they're technical positions, but require a level of math that maybe is lower than an engineer, they're having a hard time with that. It is really important that all of our students have those opportunities and that they not be denied that early on by a choice they made or didn't make. I have been looking at increasing the teacher requirements so that we have math teachers in the elementary school with math endorsements or math certificates, because right now our licensing requirements for elementary teachers, it's really more literacy based. And I think that if we want to make sure that all of our students are at the proficiency level of Algebra 2 in high school, that we have to really look at our elementary programs. And again, the challenge that I have is it's a statewide system, local control, so we have to make sure that all of our school districts see the value of this and implement curricula at the local level that will align with the Vermont standards. And in another 2 years, Vermont will be part of a national, states-led Common Core standards. So the same standards that we have in Vermont will be occurring in all other states in the country, I think 48 out of 50 states. So it's no longer just our own standards. We're now sharing the same standards nationwide, and we are now competing with kids nationwide and internationally for jobs. So for Vermont to be competitive in the future, we need to really build up our math and science expectations for students. And quite honestly, I have a hard time finding anybody who would disagree with raising math requirements for all students, something that many of us took for granted and many folks assume is happening in schools, and it's not. So that's our, the position of the Department of Education. We're more than happy to answer questions later on.
Thank you. Secretary.
As the Commissioner mentioned, this is something that affects folks going into any of a range of career and work opportunities. And over the years, our expectations have changed. People's needs for different educational components have changed. And this is a normal updating of what needs to happen. Basic mathematics and scientific literacy is at a higher level than it used to be. What you need to know to be successful working and voting both have gone up, ratcheted up consistently over the years. So this is about making sure that kids have options further down the road to do whatever they choose to do. And it's not just about the discrete mathematics skills. I think we all understand that there's different ways of doing the math itself. But one of America's great competitive advantages is our ability to innovate. And that innovation goes on an embedded culture of problem solving and creativity, and exposing all kids to this type of problem solving and these ways of thinking is as important as making sure they get the discrete math skills. Thanks.
Thanks, Lawrence. Ben, thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here, Bill. Thank you very much. I want to reiterate everything that's been said so far in emphasizing that the mastery of these key math skills is absolutely essential to success in the 21st century economy. Not just for our individual students, which of course is vitally important, but for our state economy as a whole. And it's very critical that we ensure that not just some, but all of our high school students have access to quality instruction in these key areas. So We are very, very pleased to see this recommendation. And as the governor said, we do have jobs at IBM today that we are having difficulty filling because of the skill gap, the math skill gap in the state of Vermont. So we're pleased to support this recommendation and hope that we can move forward quickly in implementing the pieces that are on the table. We recognize that there are many factors involved in academic success in mathematics, and only a few perhaps have been discussed today, but we think it's very important that we move forward on the items that we can address immediately while we look for other factors that will be key to add to this strategy for success. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. Appreciate it. We'd be happy to collectively take any questions you might have.
Do you know how many kids are taking these kinds of classes? You see how many are required to, but do you have a sense of how many?
The commissioner can probably help you with that. There are more students taking them than are required. And do you want to?
Yes. Weigh in on that? We have over 50% of our students are taking algebra and geometry throughout their high school education, even though their high school may not necessarily require that as a graduation requirement.
But is it close to 90%?
No, it's not. It's nowhere near 90%. It's probably closer to between 55 and 60% of our kids. And I can check the specifics later if you want to send me an email.
Is there any
There's a point there I just want to make that's really important about this proposal, which is not only are too few of them taking algebra and geometry, but when they are taking it matters. In other words, if you take algebra in 11th grade and you're tested in 11th grade for algebra, it's pretty unlikely that you're going to understand algebra and the basic requirement of the test. So it's not only that we're suggesting it be required, but it's when it's required, 9th grade versus 11th or 12th grade for algebra 1.
Is there a link? Is there any proven link between the students that are taking these classes and that are performing well on the tests?
There is a link, but our link that we're really focusing on is college and career ready. In order for a student to be able to apply to whether it's a 2-year or 4-year school, they need these courses. And yes, there is a link to that, and there are some schools that have very close links. But really, what we're talking about is a much broader picture. Rather than doing well on assessment, it's are we preparing students to be ready to go on their education after high school?
Are you doing this though, I mean, recently our test scores came back pretty bad. Is this in response to that?
Well, it was, you know, the fact that our math kneecap scores weren't where we would like them to be. The real issue that I saw was the drop-off between 8th grade and grade 11. Now, we know there's a lot of factors there, but there was about a 30% drop of students meeting the standard. And again, to me, it's not meeting the standard in 11th grade. It's have all students prepared themselves to go on with their education by passing classes. And I do want to say one thing. It's not that our teachers aren't doing their job, because we have some of the top teachers in the country here in Vermont. It's not that our students aren't capable of doing it. The system, whether it's local boards not aligning their curriculum to the standards or the State Board of Education's rules not requiring that, it's really the system, I think, has not required that all students be held to a higher standard. And that's really where we're going with this.
I think it's worth mentioning here, just saying how I got on this one, you know, having spent the last year out talking to employers, I'm amazed at the number of stories that I hear, like Janet Doyle just told you from IBM. Employers turn to me and say, Governor, you know, you're spending a lot of money per capita, per person, per student on education in Vermont, but all I can tell you is we've got to retrain them in math, or train them in math, give them basic math that they don't have when we hire them. Or we're having trouble, as Janet just said, finding enough Vermonters to do the jobs that we have that are open. And then when I saw the test scores, 38%, put those two together, I called the commissioner and said, you know, why is this? He said, one of the problems is that frankly, our standards don't match our requirements. And as you know, I'm a big believer in local control. But we have adopted the standards. We have not adopted the requirements that would actually match the standards, and that's what we're trying to put together here today.
How do you match this with local control though? Like if the schools decided, well, we'd rather, you know, we're more into science, or we're more into...
Well, we're all for that too. I mean, we hope they're more into science, because we could use some results there too that are a little better. But the bottom line is, If you have state standards, which we do, and you don't have the requirements to match it, you're only giving local communities half a loaf. We either should have no standards, no assessments, and no requirements, or we need to have standards and requirements. I'm a believer that if you're gonna have standards, you better have the requirements to match those standards, so that you don't have 36% proficiency in math when you're tested in a national test.
So why wasn't this?
Would require school districts to hire a large number of new math teachers, do you think?
Well, you know, I don't think so. I think that it will require us to, it's not that the students aren't being taught in those blocks of time, it's what they're being taught that might change. It's not as if we're just saying to the students, see you later, we don't need a teacher for this day, go somewhere else. What we're saying is we need to engage more grade, geometry, algebra teachers, science teachers, we know this isn't new news, and ensure that that's where we're spending more of our focus.
So you don't think you don't need the legislature's approval to enact these
No,
standards?
the commissioner and I are urging the state board, who actually, where the rubber hits the road, to adopt these requirements.
Where does the change in the curriculum take place, though? If you have, I know that some parents think that there should be more hands-on kinds of methods of, even for acquiring algebra skills or geometry skills. Where can that happen?
Well, right now, the Vermont standards, or what's called the NECAP standards, which are for the four New England states, are consistent all the way through, and they're really building blocks. What is occurring is that students are getting those skills, as we can see by the 8th grade math results, which are in the mid-60s, but then they're going a couple of years without taking the appropriate math. So yes, hands-on applied math. One of the things that I want to make sure that people understand is that as we look at transforming education in Vermont and doing things differently, Algebra 1, Algebra 2 geometry can be embedded in another class, it could be integrated together, there could be a lot of ways of meeting those standards without calling something, let's say, algebra geometry, depending on how the school set it up. And to us, that's the key, because I may learn differently than someone else. They might learn better in a traditional classroom theory, where I need the theory then applied so I can understand that math. And I think that the younger we start with those concepts and starting to raise the bar and expectations by having better trained teachers, not more teachers, but better trained elementary math teachers, I think we will get that results. Right now we have very low student-teacher ratios, we have the capability, the system has to align and support what's happening in the schools.
Commissioner, we've had Vermont standards since the late 90s. Why has it taken so long for us to match the standards with the requirements?
You're right. We've had, well, the NECAP standards came into place in 2003, 2004. We did have the prior standards. The way that our school quality standards work and our rules work is that we set out the standards and then expect that local boards, local districts, will align their curriculum to the standards. Obviously, that hasn't happened. When we know that only 38% of our schools are requiring both algebra and geometry. So I think to a certain extent, with some of the turnover that we have in local districts, some of the different interest areas or focus that they may have kept these math standards and science standards and others maybe not to keep up with what's required. But ultimately, it is local boards' decisions in the state of Vermont to align their curriculum with the Vermont standards. If not, we're really not preparing kids, not only for our state assessment, which is just secondary in my mind, but we're not preparing them to be successful Vermonters who can continue their education and work and live and raise families here in Vermont.
So how can you make it happen now if it's been a problem in the past?
This is my third year trying to figure out how to do some of these things. One of the things that we're looking at is that we would require all districts, a superintendent and school board chair, to sign an agreement, AMO, if you will, basically saying that they will guarantee that their curriculum is aligned to the standards. So then at least we have something to hold, to go back and say to someone, have you done this? You signed off, both as a board chair and a superintendent, that you would do that. But ultimately, it's local decisions. Local boards have to make these decisions. The results would be either negative if they didn't, where students may not be graduating from high school prepared to go on to post-secondary education. And knowing that right now, only 44% of our high school graduates go on to some form of post-secondary education. We have the second highest graduation rate in the country, but we have one of the lowest continuation rates in the country. So what that's telling me is that it's not that our kids aren't bright enough or our teachers aren't doing what they need to do. It's that we're not making sure that all students are prepared to continue their education once they graduate from high school.
When you were at Franklin West, was it, how would this have changed life there if you had to require kids to take algebra?
After I stopped complaining about it, do you?
Yeah. How long did that go?
That took a lot of energy.
Yeah, I know. I think it would not have taken a whole lot. Because again, we were working towards, the goal was making sure that all of our kids were ready to graduate from high school, prepared to go on. It would probably mean that we would be requiring more students to have the pre-algebra skills in middle school than they may have had in the past, but I don't think that this would have been a challenge that everyone would have seen as something that was good. And additionally, we always keep saying that algebra in 9th grade, geometry in 10th grade. We have many students who are taking algebra online, local school districts that have algebra and geometry in middle school, and I think that we have to start looking at when students are ready to take it in middle school, they should be allowed to take these courses, which then would allow them to go to higher courses, algebra 2, pre-calc, AP calculus, AB or BC calculus, which are the very high-level college classes. Dual enrollment work that the governor has been very supportive of, increasing our dual enrollment opportunities to provide students with more and more options. Looking at online, Vermont virtual learning, there are a lot of opportunities that a school that may be unable to provide all of those things for their students can now go online, can now use other means to provide all of their students with the challenges that that will help them be successful in the future.
What kind of response do you expect to get from school boards and from teachers?
Well, I did have I did send out to the, this is not a secret that we've been talking about this. We sent out a survey to all the high schools in the state, and every one of them responded. I've received an incredible amount of support from high school principals. I received a brief email from a school board member recently who thought this was a good idea. So I think that there's going to be a lot of support. I'm sure there will be folks who say that our kids aren't ready, or that maybe because of the achievement gap, kids live in poverty versus don't, that we may be asking too much of some kids, and I disagree completely. We know that we have high expectations for all students, provide them the support that they need, that all kids can be successful with our standards.
Do you notice a difference in performance between boys and girls in these skills? And is that part of the problem that you can address here?
I will address it briefly because I'm just starting to do some research. I'm going to be coming out with, I do believe that we have a crisis right now with our boys. If you look at the boys who live in poverty in the 11th grade, only 19% of those kids have met the standard in math. 19%. If we look at what's happening in our college entrance requirements in colleges, there are more young women who are better prepared. So I do think that we have to look at the education of boys and how we're addressing that in our schools, K through 12, that I think will improve what we're doing, but it's one of those things. Years ago, remember we were talking about young women not going into advanced math and science. I think we've been successful, but at the same time, we have not been successful in making sure that all of our boys are achieving that level.
Can you ask what kind of jobs at IBM are going unfilled because there aren't qualified candidates?
Sure. In particular, we're challenged right now to fill those technician positions that were mentioned earlier, which would typically be like a 2-year technical or engineering degree type position. In the case of 4-year engineering degrees, we would like to be able to hire more Vermont folks into those positions, but we can draw on a wider regional resource to fill those jobs. That's more challenging with the technician jobs, and due to our inability to fill those open technician jobs, we actually have created, as the governor alluded to, created some internal training programs within IBM to try to grow our, for instance, production operators into those positions and provide them opportunities for career success and higher earnings. And once again, we found that many of those folks are not adequately prepared with math skills to be successful in that curriculum. So it is a pervasive challenge, and we're happy to see that this is beginning to address it.
What kind of pay does a technician get?
Depending on the specific job, those pay ranges can go up to, say, $60,000, some even higher a year.
How much are the engineering, the four-year engineering degree?
That's a much wider range,
Mm-hmm.
but some of those jobs can range up over $100,000 a year for sure.
It's mentioned here that most schools only require 3 years of math. Is there an expectation that there will be more in the future, 4 years at some point?
Let's start here. If we can make progress, let's talk the big picture. I'm not a governor who believes that we are failing in our educational mission in Vermont. I think we're succeeding. I'm incredibly proud of our education system, of our public schools, of our hardworking teachers. The fact that, let's emphasize the positive here for a minute, that we're doing so well in English language arts suggests that our system's working. But if we're going to be the education state that actually prepares workers for 21st century jobs like IBM, we have to do even better, and we know that. And this is an area where if we can have Algebra 1 for all 9th graders, Geometry for all 10th graders, and by 2017, Algebra 2 for most of our high school students, we're going to win on the jobs front. It's that simple. So this is really bringing together what we know we have to do with what we must do to improve an already great system.
I know it's hard to compare, but do you know other states are doing that?
Some states are doing exactly what we're doing. Many states are more prescriptive than we are. They're actually not only making these requirements, but also the actual curriculum that schools will follow. Where in Vermont, we have a little bit different, that 3-year math requirement. The State Board of Education requires 3 years of math, doesn't identify which 3 years. Based on the results of our student continuation rate from high school and some of our other indicators, we feel that this is a requirement. But there are many other states that are starting to do the same. They're aligning themselves to the Common Core, which comes into place nationally in 3 years.
When would this go into place?
As soon as the State Board of Education approves it, which we hope they will, but frankly, we'd be shooting for you. Want to
Sure. We're bringing this to the State Board of Education. The State Board is aware of all of this information. We've been keeping them abreast. At the next meeting, we'll be doing a presentation on the results of our study, which we'll post online today, by the way, so you can see the exact our study. And then we'll be discussing with them about an implementation period where we go from 3 years of math to 3 years of math that require algebra and geometry, and then eventually algebra 2, as the governor said. Now, even if the board approves it this coming spring, we have to go through the rulemaking process in Vermont. It takes anywhere from 6 to 8 months, so it would be a challenge, but I think it's a good goal to look at this coming September. At worst, it would be the following September once we follow the state of Vermont rulemaking process and approval process for change of rules.
So can you just clarify what's required now? This says that most schools do 3 years of math, but are you saying that it's required?
All schools do 3 years of math. However, what the governor may take, he may be taking algebra and geometry, and I may be taking math fundamentals, accounting, or other courses that are not at the same level that he is. And we're both graduating from the same high school, however.
basic math.
Right.
I was, a week ago at the White House, President Obama made a point that I thought was important, which is, he believes and I believe that we're not going to succeed in wresting jobs from the countries that are stealing our jobs unless we can get this one right. But when we talk about higher education and Vermont's students who are doing so well in terms of graduation rates in high school, actually moving on to higher education, it doesn't mean we're saying you have to have a 4-year degree, although it helps. We are saying that you have to have additional training. You have to have additional training and skills, as Janet just pointed out, that are necessary for IBM and so many of our employers that weren't required of our parents to make a good living. So the world has changed, we must change with it, and this is yet another example of how we can be the job state.
I just had a question about the timeline, because really, teachers sport, we're talking about improving skills among teachers, and how could that possibly take place between now and September?
Well, I think that, I don't believe, when we look at our licensing requirements for high school teachers. They have to be math majors. So I'm not concerned about the issues at the high school. I think that the issues at the high school are is that right now, because we've basically tracked students, some into a more college pathway and those maybe that aren't, that some of the teachers may need to have a better preparation to teach all students. But our elementary and middle school teachers, who I think right now are meeting those standards, will also have to bump up their expectations. And that's why when I went to the Vermont Standards Board, which is our licensing, teacher licensing board, that we really need to look at that. And we have a wonderful program, Vermont Math Institute, VMI, which is really focused on teaching elementary teachers how to be top-notch math teachers. And it's a math program. We have over 200 teachers who have gone through VMI, and that's really one of our goals, is to have all of our elementary teachers be math experts, which will make that whole process smoother and the transition easier from middle school to high school.
Governor, do you know how many towns, how many school boards or parents followed your suggestion to hold the line on education?
You know, I'm pretty proud of our school boards across the state. 215 towns have reported in that I know about. Of those 215 towns, 6 school boards rejected their budgets and all the others adopted them, so that's good news for Vermont. In terms of the average increase in school spending, I think it'll average out to somewhere around 2.9%. It's a preliminary number. Obviously, Vermonters understand that if you increase spending 2.9% at your local school board, your property taxes will go up by 2.9%. We all get that. Those decisions are made locally. But it's certainly a much better number than what we were getting for the previous decade, with the exception of the last 2 years. So we're making progress. I'm proud of the hard work our school boards did. The more we can level fund spending, the more we level fund property taxpayers for Vermonters who are struggling to pay their bills.
So does this mean we need to increase the property tax statewide?
Let me be clear. If you choose to increase spending at your town meeting, your property taxes will go up. If you level fund spending, your property taxes won't. I just read about the town of Sharon, who level funded their property taxes, their school increases. Sharon's property taxes will not go up. Burlington increased their bill by 10.9%, I believe. Their property taxes will go up.
Are you disappointed that some did increase their spending?
You know, I'm a big believer in local control. You know how I felt about it. I do believe that the school boards have done an extraordinary job on average over the past 2 years, prior to this year, by level funding their school budgets. That's a great achievement. After having 8, 9, 10, 6% increases for many years, that's a huge help to struggling Vermonters. I think the school boards were very cognizant of the fact that Vermonters are still struggling, that many are looking for jobs, others wish that their jobs paid more. And the result is that you've seen a roughly 2.5% to 3% increase. You know, that's not zero. I would have rather had zero, but it's headed in the right direction, and I think our school boards work very hard to do this job well.
What are you going to do about Lowell and Edentown if they overwhelmingly rejected that Superfund proposal? What happens to that waste pile now? Can the state afford to clean it up?
No, we can't, and I don't think we should. I mean, my own judgment is that we have made mitigation progress in ensuring that we keep the remnants or the chemical, the ingredients that we don't want in the water out of water, so that when the rain hits the pilings, they're not washing the wood. That's all good. We've got to maintain those and make sure that we continue to be mindful of the need to ensure that the pilings aren't leaching into the road. On the other hand, as I said before the vote, I think the voters made the right decision. I think we should let sleeping dogs lie on that one. And I think that by continuing our mitigation efforts, all will be well in Lowell and Eden.
So not trying to cover it all up with dirt, not trying to move it, just keep the erosion in.
Keep the erosion, which we've done. We've gone in, we've done some mitigation to keep the pilings from leaching into our waterways, and obviously we should maintain those. But you know, I do think that it's important that the Vermonters know that when you look at proposed Superfund sites, this one is not, in my judgment, having an adverse impact on the people of Lowell or Eden.
The legislature is considering a new mechanism to collect the statewide property tax. They want to have the state collect it instead of municipalities. What do you think of that idea?
You know, I'm open to any suggestions that might improve our school funding formula. My own view is that one's pretty cumbersome. I've heard about it for a lot of years. It's never happened. There are problems, and I'll believe it when I see the bill on my desk.
What, as the legislature comes back next week, what are you expecting to see from them? What would you like to see from them?
Well, we have a lot of work to do. Obviously, we have another $54 million cut from the budget, and it's critically important that we have a balanced budget that doesn't raise broad-based taxes. Second, we have issues to solve around Irene, from state office complexes to ensuring that we fund the local promises that we've made to local communities, that their property taxes for FEMA reimbursed expenses won't go up more than 3%, that we have the resources to local communities so they can rebuild as we start to thaw out here and have more building opportunities for road construction. And then I very much want to see the progress that's being made on healthcare and many of the other bills to help us continue to grow jobs and economic opportunities for Vermonters. So they have a lot to do. Now, can they get it all done? Will we have all the answers? Probably not, but we're going to do the best we can.
Will there be clear answers on Friday from the architect's report on Walker?
That remains to be seen. You know, obviously, the architects have gone out and looked at 3 options. Going back to Waterbury, building right down here where the liquor control and labor is, or building on a new spot. We're all waiting in numbers to see what it means for Vermont taxpayers. As you know, as I've said in my State of the State budget, and as I said again yesterday in Waterbury, my first choice, my preference would be to go back to Waterbury, but the numbers are going to matter, and we're going to have to see what they say.
But is there going to be an answer Friday, or I mean, is it going to be clear from this report which solutions?
It's hard to say that without knowing what the report says.
But you have not gotten any hints about this report and
Not
what's in
that-
it?
I haven't gotten enough of a hint to be able to answer your question with any wisdom.
So it's going to be a sort of a matrix of choices. If you get money from here, you can do this. Is a lot of it contingent upon funding from FEMA and insurance?
Yeah, there's 2 questions as I see it. First is, what do each of the 3 options cost? And then second question, which we won't have the answers to Friday, is exactly what are we going to get reimbursed from the insurance company, and what will FEMA do for the various scenarios? And frankly, FEMA can't really answer the question until they know what scenario looks most likely. So we're not going to have all the answers on Friday no matter what happens. We will have the initial cost estimates for the 3 options, which would be very helpful. We hope.
Good morning, Governor. You had made a statement the other day regarding Rush Limbaugh's comments towards Sandra Fluke, characterizing them as vile and reprehensible. When you had made those comments, were you aware that Mr. Limbaugh had not opened a debate on whether or not a woman could use contraceptives? And who do you feel should be responsible for obtaining and paying for contraceptives on demand at Georgetown or in Vermont?
Let me first say that I'm a little surprised that as a nation we're having a conversation that I thought happened when I was a little teeny kid about whether women in this country should have access to contraception. I thought that would happen a long time ago. And if I were the Republican candidate running for president of the United States, I'd be focused on jobs and job creation. I wouldn't be trying to restrict women's ability to have contraception available to them regardless of their insurance policy. So I find it a little astonishing that we're having a conversation at all. Having said that, I heard Rush Limbaugh's comments. They were reprehensible. There's no way to interpret them any other way than the way I interpret them, which is I can't remember in recent history hearing such a degrading, despicable response to a woman who is fighting for her own reproductive rights.
Well, do you know, Limbaugh did not challenge her right to use contraceptives. Were you
I heard what Limbaugh said, and I think the rest of America did too. And I personally applaud the advocates that are pulling out of the show, and if I were he, I would voluntarily get off the air.
Why were you interested in making a comment on a national issue?
Because I think that there's a time when everyone, every leader in the free world should stand up for women and their rights when they're being trampled on. And as I said, I'm shocked that we're having this conversation as a nation. At a time when Vermonters and Americans care more about job creation, economic security, we're literally having a conversation that my mother was having and fighting for when I was a kid in 1956, 58, and 1960. What has become of the national dialogue that someone like Rush can get on the air and make accusations like he did about a woman who is simply fighting for coverage for her reproductive future? I just find it astonishing.
But you say the Republican presidential candidates are the ones who brought it out, but I believe it was George Stephanopoulos who brought it out of nowhere and even surprised Governor Romney. And then President Obama has asked religious institutions to include this. So isn't it the Democrats, not the Republicans, who are bringing this issue to the forefront?
You know, I think we all know where it came from. And as you know, it's been a major part of the campaign, both Rick Santorum and now Mitt Romney and Newt Gingrich. They've been talking about it every opportunity they can find. All I'm saying is, you know, not only are they talking about reproductive issues that I thought we settled when I was a little child, but we're not talking about that. They're so doom and gloom on the future of America that I sometimes think they grew up in a different country than I did. I mean, this is a optimistic, hopeful nation that is more innovative than any other country in the world, that has an extraordinarily bright future if we do things right, like educate our kids, which we're talking about today, like invest in broadband, like ensure that we pay our bills, as we do in Vermont. We don't spend money we don't have, and ensure that we get healthcare costs under control. These are the things that these candidates, in my view, should be discussing, because that's what Americans care about. They don't really want to go back to the 1950s, when women didn't have reproductive rights.
Should Vermont cover contraception under Green Mountain Healthcare and other plans?
Absolutely.
What was your reaction to having a Democrat as mayor in Burlington for the first time in 31 years?
You know, I'm very proud of Moreau's victory. I think he's going to be a great mayor. I've known Moreau for years. I hired him to come help us run the Senate campaign back when I was a minority leader, and he helped us get the majority that year. But I've known Moreau since he was a young man. He's incredibly focused, very bright, extraordinarily fair, listens, has great vision, and he can get tough things done. I think the city of Burlington is really going to be well served by his leadership. So I don't care so much about the partisan end of it, but I do care that Burlington has a new mayor that will take the city in a new direction. You know, it's our biggest city in the state, bright future along with the rest of the state. It needs strong leadership, and I'm proud of the choices the voters made.
Thank you.